It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Nonprofits, the show where we chill out for a little while and discuss news and topics of the day from a skeptical humanist perspective. My name is Laura Magee, and tonight's topics are going to be extra juicy. I have with me today my return hosts, Richard Gilliver and August, both of whom I've worked with in the past. But August, this is my first time working with you on The Nonprofits. So I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah,
Um,
excited to be here.
Fantastic. Just as a reminder, this show is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. So today we are going to talk about the Pope holding one of his underlings responsible for bad behavior, the reduction of child marriage in the Philippines, a little chitty chat about the good old Piltdown man, the bugger we just can't seem to flick, and how Gen Zers view sex and love. So, as with all of our shows, links are in the discussion. I am so sorry. Links for today's topics and news that we discuss are available in the description below. And if you ever want to check them out before the show starts, check out the Nonprofits Facebook fan page every Friday night because we put a list of all the articles there ahead of time so you can check them out and come to the show prepared. All right, I'm really excited to get tonight's show started, and we are going to have August go ahead and introduce our first topic.
All right. So, first, for segment one, we have Pope Watch. So, this article is called Pope Francis Removes Vatican Official Behind the Document Barring Blessings for LGBTQIA Couples. And so, basically, the Pope is cool with people getting married, especially discriminated people, the LGBTQIA plus community. And so the official who originally said that that wasn't okay was, I guess, demoted. So what does everybody think about that?
So I'm going to let Richard take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to take the lead on this one. This is to me it screams of damage limitation. When we have a look at what actually happened when the Archbishop Miranda first put this out, he actually asked for it. The Pope was in full knowledge that this was going to be published, essentially, and he agreed to it. Seemingly, the article says it gave his assent to it, so he knew all about this. And then all of a sudden, when there's backlash, we've got good old Miranda becoming a scapegoat for the Pope. There seems to be, it seems to be cut and dried if you look into the facts of it.
Yeah. The first thing I thought was scapegoat, right? But what also got me about it was that he was demoted. He wasn't removed. He wasn't fired. He was just kind of like sort of silently moved on from one job position to another, and he gets to maintain his what do you call it? He still gets to be called an archdiocese, right? His title, there it is. Yeah.
His title's attached to him as a person, not to
Not
the
his
position. I think it was. So even though he's technically been demoted, he's still got the same title. It seems a little bit weird.
Yeah. So I'm with you that this really does feel very reactionary to the backlash that they got, right? So I suspect, as you two do, that the Pope was in full knowledge of the letter that came out that said that LGBT couples can't get married, and I think he was fully in support. But when he started getting a backlash from his actual congregation, he realized he's got a problem on his hands, and so I think this guy was allowed to take the fall for him, and I think that the way they did it is very similar to the way that they handle the child molesters and stuff in the church, where they just sort of move them along to another place and hope that everybody eventually forgets about it.
Yeah, one thing that struck me about this was that in the article it says that the Pope reached out to the gay Catholic community, and one of the people it cites is a nun, Sister Gramick, is it? Uh, and on her 50 years of LGBTQ plus ministry, that doesn't seem like a member of the gay Catholic community. Essentially, this is a woman she's been patted on the head for doing well and going amongst all those dirty gay people and preaching the word. But yet she's considered as part of the community. That's how distanced they are from kind of real life.
Yeah.
August, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Back to kind of your point about the the elephant in the room is the Catholic Church has been alleged to have a bunch of child sexual abuse cases. And what was actually very interesting about this article was that it said that the guy who was demoted was actually part of the department, I guess you would call it, or congregation that deals with those cases and quote unquote handles them, or rather does not handle them. So I just thought that was another like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's not coincidental. So that kind of that part I yeah, got my attention for sure.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up. It's the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, right? And one of their roles is to kind of interpret doctrine, but another role is to handle the cases of clergy sexual abuse to minors. And I thought when I was reading that congregation in and of itself is problematic, because now you don't just have the church
Absolutely.
overwatching itself for its own doctrine, which I completely agree with. Having that sort of oversight within an organization to make sure people are following its own doctrine. But now you're talking about a part of the church that's responsible for legal oversight of what their employees, for lack of a better word, are doing. And so now you have, instead of the law or some outside agency looking in on these cases, you have an internal agency looking in on these cases. And I find that to be incredibly problematic.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to mention was I think I might have originally read the article slightly different than the two of you. I guess I kind of, for a little bit, was like, okay, well, as much as this is, very much a scapegoat situation, I was like, okay, well, for half a second, maybe people will start being more understanding and less discriminatory. I was very optimistic. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, because a lot of people just follow the religion that they already have biases towards the doctrines that they agree with. And so they'll just choose that certain religion. So I feel like, I wonder if some people are even saying like, well, he's not really Catholic if he's saying that being gay is okay, which is really funny because he's the head of the Catholic Church. But I wonder if people are saying that.
Yeah, for me, this was the major kind of thing of the article. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's that is what I'm torn on over this, and not just within Catholicism, but in all religions. And I think in one aspect, the Pope coming out with this, despite its kind of underhanded kind of thing behind it, is going to encourage a lot of Catholics to be more open towards gay people, more understanding towards gay people, and that's good. That without a doubt, that's good. And on one hand, or on the face of it, at least we should applaud a progressive Pope. He's coming out and is willing to apologize to the LGBTQ plus community, and they're not all going to do that. Not all religious leaders would do that. But the fact is that the offense occurred in the first place. And,
Yeah, good point.
to reach out, which I do suspect is kind of to stop people leaving the church. I did a bit of background reading on this, and overall Catholic numbers have increased. The percentage of Catholics in relation to the world population has dropped. So people are being born into the Catholic Church and numbers are going up, but overall the numbers are coming down. It's an exercise in damage limitation, realistically. And
Yeah, so go ahead.
so I was just going to say, I noticed in Laura's notes as well that Laura had touched on this point as well, that Christianity has changed over the years to survive. And it's continuing to do so in this. And that's how successful religions become successful religions. They've all done it to a degree. None of them have remained static. They all move with culture and time, and geographically they all adapt to get into the new cultures they come into. But are progressive religions traditions better than hardliners? Because bad thinking is bad thinking at the end of the day. And it's okay saying God belief is justified in the first place, but I'm not entirely sure if progressive is really a good thing for secular community at large. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, you bring up a couple of good points, but and I want to hear August's thoughts on your latest point, but I kind of wanted to go back to the first point that you guys were making about the Pope and whether there's like a silver lining, and I kind of wanted to put in my 2 cents because I had more of an optimistic outlook than I think maybe the two of you did, or maybe just as optimistic. But I really do think in the long run, churches adopting these kinds of positions where they're saying, "Oh, no, 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 we're not anti-LGBT." It might not actually be their stance, and it might be very painful for them to make those kinds of statements. And they might even have the really hardline congregants who think they're being contradicting or are going against their own doctrine. But the positive impact that this will have in a generation or two, if not immediately, I think outweighs any sort of hypocrisy in the sense that at the very least, less people are being harmed. And I mean, I agree with Gilliver that watered down religion is bad thinking, regardless of how harmless it is, and there's a case for that certainly. But I really do think that whether he was put in a corner or not, this public of a declaration can only help the LGBT community towards less oppression and in the long run, less people seeing them as being something outside of the Christian faith or the Catholic faith, right? Like a little bit more accepted within those communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I did make a note of that in my notes. There is a big counterpoint to the argument I've just made about bad thinking, and that's that the more likely people are to be progressive in the short term is going to be a benefit to individuals. And I made a note about in Muslim countries where in the world there are 11 majority Muslim countries where homosexuality is potentially, not always, and it hasn't always been, but potentially punishable by death.
Mhm.
And if you get those progressive leaders coming out in those countries, that's really going to make a difference to individuals' lives. It's going to make the difference. The more
Literally.
of these people come out, the more Pope figures you have in those kinds of countries. And it's not just Islam, it's Hinduism, it's lots of different cultures, sub-Saharan African cultures as well. But the more individuals come out and take a stance against it, while still retaining those beliefs, then the more progressive it's going to get, and that's going to stop people. It's punishable that by death in some countries to get thrown off buildings,
Yeah.
and the more people we can stop being lashed or thrown off buildings or stoned to death, which is another punishment for homosexuality in some of these countries, the better. So that is a big, big, hard counter argument.
Yeah, and Laura brought up a point that kind of stuck with me too, like the fact that maybe the change will be more gradual, like over generations. Like maybe we won't see anything drastic right now, especially with the older generations who are, what people say, stuck in their ways. But then maybe the younger generations, like both of you were mentioning, will become more progressive because that's what they grew up with. And people sometimes have a tendency to stay with what they were, raised on. So, maybe we won't see any, dramatic changes right away. But I do think like the Islam point, I think it really could at least help. I think it's going to be a slow change. Societies, and I mean, it's always kind of a slow moving process, but yeah, I think over the long run this will be a good thing. I hope at least.
Yeah, I
And I
think
think there's
that. Sorry, Laura, go on.
No, I was just gonna say really quickly that even in the immediate future, there's a lot of people that are on the border about their feelings, whether they want to support or whether they think it's a sin to be part of the LGBT community. And so those people that are on the border are very likely to shift in regards to how their organizations, their religious organization thinks. So, and I hate to like sort of dehumanize them in the sense of like, oh, they'll just follow whatever direction their organization pushes them in. But there are those borderline people that will, like, just flat out, right? So there will be sort of, I think, at least a positive slip in the right direction. And then you're gonna have those hardliners that, like August said, like they're in a either a generation or a time in their lives where they're just stuck. And it doesn't matter what the Pope says, they'll hate the Pope before they start to embrace people that they've already decided they don't like.
Yeah, I think it's and I'm going to go back to Islam again, just simply because it's a good black and white case to use. I
Mhm.
think you can see that this actually within a couple of generations does start to occur, because if you have a look at Muslims, certainly in Britain, I can't speak for America, but in Britain, and I know a lot of Muslim people. I've got friends who are Muslim, and none of them would consider stoning somebody to death because they were gay. They're
Right.
happy to live and work amongst them, and even count them as friends. And I think that shows how quickly this can change if someone's like entire culture focus changes. And I think that's good, and it can be demonstrated to work pretty quickly. In the grand scheme of things, if the conditions are right for that to come to fruition.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and it kind of goes back to what was in my notes that you had mentioned earlier about the interplay between cultures and religion. So, religion, people see it as this like monolith that's stuck in its ways and it's so ancient. And I will agree that on average, religious bodies tend to adapt slower to cultural trends. But in order to survive, there's a point where the religion has to it's like do or die, right? And especially in cultures like our own where there's so much driving force that like I know a lot of Christian churches now are really really struggling to keep up numbers and to get people to come into the church. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of their hardline beliefs and beliefs that are really against human rights and against personal autonomy. And so the more they adopt those beliefs, the more that the church or the longer the church will survive. And so I think the same is true with Islam eventually. So it's insulated in a lot of those Islamic dominant countries where Islam is like the state religion. There's a lot of insulation there and a lot of protection from outside influence for Islam itself. But as soon as it leaks into Great Britain or America or any of these countries that are not predominantly Muslim, there's a lot of mixing of ideas, and that's where the pressure comes from. And so I'm hopeful with you, Richard. I think Islam's gonna be a heck of a lot slower than Catholicism, but I think that the more that the congregants start to change their minds, and the more that they see other people as being human or as deserving of rights, the less the ruling bodies are going to have the ability to continue to oppress those people.
Um,
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Autumn.
that's all right.
August, sorry.
That's okay. I also wanted to hear your opinion on, like, he just said that they could receive blessing, but they didn't necessarily come out and say this isn't a sin and they're not going to hell for it. And they can, I mean, I guess it's sort of in a roundabout way does, but I wonder what you guys think about like using that specific terminology of sin. Because that's just such a sticking point for them to love the sinner, hate the sin. And so it's like, well, if the Pope's saying that's not a sin anymore, then I mean, what happens then? I just wanted to hear what you guys thought. I think it was interesting.
Magee.
Yeah, it really is open to interpretation the way that they did it, because you're right. They're not saying that outright being gay is okay or good or godly. They're just saying that priests and dioceses and archdioceses have the right to bless the union. But you're right. Like, you can bless a sinner who's, say, a thief, and that doesn't mean that stealing is good, and that doesn't mean that they are saying that the thief is going to heaven. So you're right. It's very, very tricky language, and it could very well be exactly like what we were talking about with the covering up of the outrage, right? Trying to appease the people who are outraged without also appeasing those who disagree with allowing gay marriage or gay unions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get the distinct impression they're trying to walk a tightrope and keep the traditionalists and the up and coming progressive Catholics all in one basket. That's I can't help but do it. I might be being cynical doing that, but that's how it comes across to me. That's how the whole from initially reading the article, that's it. That's the first thing that jumped out at me. That this is it's an exercise in damage limitation. We've got that's what it is. We're going to put the blame on this guy because we don't want to like offend our gay members, really. But at the same time, we're not going to go the whole hog and say homosexuality is fine. You can be gay and happily get married and have children. We're not going to go that far, but we're going to put out like throw a few crumbs.
What do you think, August? Do you think that they were just trying to appease a noisy, outrageous part of the congregation?
I mean, yes, I think it's a little bit of everything. It's the trying to appeal to the people who are becoming more progressive, and there's a lot more gay people that are out, and so now especially these young Catholics are like, hey, but my best friend is gay and I don't want to believe that they're going to hell. And then I also think that, there are so many people that were Catholic and then leaving it because either they were gay or they just didn't believe that being gay would send you to hell or whatever it is. I feel like it's probably mostly to save their own asses, but yeah, I don't know. It's all up to interpretation, which is, I think they use such cloudy language that it's just so wishy-washy that it could be put any different way. So I know that doesn't really answer what you're saying, but just kind of yes and
No,
no.
it
I don't know.
does. Yeah, I think we're all three in agreement, actually, that ultimately whatever came out of this was vague and could have some good positive effects in the future, but wasn't necessarily anything like earth-shattering in terms of the Pope changing his mind. So, yeah. And I think that's actually a really good spot to sort of wrap up this particular article and move on. So for now, let's take just a really quick break in our conversation. And just in case you didn't tune into the other ACA shows last week, let's take a quick look at what you missed.
a couple of years of like terrible government management and the crumbling of society. Okay, I'm gonna have an existential crisis if we don't move on.
It's difficult. Everyone's having a difficult time. Just remember that the obstacle is the path.
Whoa, the obstacle is that like a Buddhist cone?
If you're gay, lesbian, or trans, you're going to get denied for this. If you look, they had even an example of a guy that looked kind of disheveled, he could get denied. So I'm like, I'm definitely not getting the money because I dress like a slob.
Yeah, I can speak from experience here. Being dead is not all what it's cracked up to be. Trust me, living is much, much, much better.
I love people, and I love learning, and I love exploring the world, and I love food, and I love sex, and I love drugs, and I love rock and roll. And all of those are reasons for living. How dare you suggest that without an eternal life, there's no reason to live?
Wow, I love when Jesus makes his appearance on Talk Heathen. So now we're going to move into segment 2, which I'll go ahead and introduce really quickly. There's actually a series. There was 3 different articles that we have posted. But the main article was about, and I think this is really, really good news, actually. But it was about the Philippines' ban on child marriage. There is kind of a catch-22, though, and it really does get into just how far we still have to go in terms of child marriage laws, not just in the Philippines, but worldwide. Because they talk about exemptions being made for religious groups to have more time to sort of adjust to this law. So if you read the article, it reads as very positive in the beginning, but then quickly you start to see sort of a negative. Well, maybe it's not all that great because some children are still allowed to get married off because the religious leaders need time to change their sort of approach, right? And so that's a little bit concerning. But then the other articles, they go into different facts about child marriage laws around the world and where we're at, where really we've got a long way to go. And one of them discusses child grooms, which we rarely in just casual conversation talk about. When we hear about child marriage, it's very commonly we think of little girls getting married off to older men or whatever the case may be. So one of the articles from NPR touches on child grooms. So I had a lot of observations on these articles, and I really can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. But I'm going to give you guys first dibs.
Yeah, I'm going to give August first dibs because I also have a lot to say on this. I think myself and Laura both have kind of, from very different perspective, a lot of background with Islam. So I'd like to just give August an opportunity to have her say before we kind of take over.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say that I will try to stay as calm as I possibly can because this topic is enraging. And I wanted to say that I was surprised, but not necessarily that the kind of practice or legality of it was changed, but more along the lines that it said something about a prison sentence of up to like 12 years, I think it was, which obviously is way too short for the crime. But, I feel like for as awful as it is to say, the culture that it's in, that is very surprising that it wasn't just like, okay, we'll make it illegal, but it'll just be a slap on the wrist, and so we'll have it's illegal, but we won't actually do anything about it. So seeing that they actually had a prison sentence was astonishing to me, just knowing somewhat about this. And then also the fact that this was going all the way up to 18 years old. Or I guess 17 years old or whatever it was. I honestly, when I read it, I was like, okay, so what are they considering a child? Because it's like, okay, some of them are saying once they hit puberty. Well, some people, oh my gosh, it's so disgusting to say, but some people hit puberty at 10 years old. And so you're saying a 10-year-old is ready to be a husband or wife? Absolutely not. And so I thought the fact that not only did it have a prison sentence, but that it went all the way up until, late teens. I thought that was amazing. Obviously, came way too late, but as awful as it is to say, better late than never. And I hope they actually put a stop to it. And the whole cultural thing, it just, if you need time to switch your culture from, I don't know, eating a certain type of food, or like some cultures take their shoes off when they walk into the house or something of that sort, I could understand if they're like, hey, we need some time to get used to this. This is children being married off to grown adults. I do not care that your culture says that that's okay, just like the genital mutilation stuff, not to get off topic, but I don't care about your culture. In terms of this, I think it's a case by case basis, but before I explode, I'll pass it off to you guys.
All right, Richard. She got me all fired up too, because August, you made a lot of points that I was dying to make. So I will reiterate them shortly. But Richard, I'm going to give you a go.
Yeah, children being married off. Let's look at the numbers, because I'm going to say this slowly, so to give people time to digest this. 115 million boys. 115 million. 650 million girls are married off as children. Now just let that sink in a little bit. Think about what August just said and let the numbers sink in.
Yeah.
This isn't a thing that should be, slow cultural change. This is something that should be stopped immediately. And and I can't remember the exact country, so I'm not going to quote a particular country. In some particular Islamic countries, the law already states that they can't get married until they're much older. But still, it's allowed under religious freedom for Muslims to marry young, even though the law of the country states otherwise. And this is a thing. We need to we need to put an end to it. In this article, as I said earlier, I've got so much to say on it. I think one important point to make, because we are talking about, the article does talk about an Islamic country. It's not just an Islamic custom. There
Right.
are
That is an
different
important
religions.
distinction to make.
Happens in the United States, I know.
Yeah. There are different religions, different cultures, and yeah, August, that's the exact next point I was going to make. It's not just these countries. This takes place in Britain, in the US. This is something we all need to fight on the local level, as well as just pointing the finger at those people over there, because this is something that goes on all over the world. Child trafficking, sex trafficking is still a thing worldwide.
To your point, and I want to just throw this out there really quick, it's also woefully underreported. So you said that, over 600 million, over 100 million, those are reported or known or estimated, right? But oftentimes, especially in countries like Britain or the United States, because we have such strict laws against it, when it does happen, it's not reported at all. So, I mean, they're not going down to the courthouse and saying, hey, this is my 15-year-old bride. Like, let us sign the paperwork. It's all done behind closed doors. So if you think those numbers are atrocious, imagine what they actually are.
That's the scary thing about it, for sure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a few states where someone maybe 16 could get married to someone as long as they have parents' consent. And that could be completely wrong, but I feel like I've heard something about that. Even if it wasn't a law, like Laura said, it's definitely happening behind closed doors. For sure. Absolutely.
So in my state, the state that I live in, the legal age of consent is 16. Yeah.
It is here
So
too in Britain.
yeah.
Yep.
Which I mean, I guess is better than no age of consent, but it's still way too young. So it's almost not. Oh, but that's what the age of consent is for sex though, which I mean, it can still be very problematic, but it's different for marriage. So I should take back what I said without research. Like I know for sure that's the age of consent for sex, but in terms of getting married, I'm not sure. Either way, like when you're
It
talking
doesn't
about
even matter.
yeah, you're talking about adult males. Now, if you're talking about a 16 and a 17-year-old having sex, or 17 and
Right.
18, I don't have any problem with that. If you're talking about a 16-year-old, getting approached by a 45-year-old, now I have some issues.
And
And
against their will, which, of course, children can't really consent anyway. But these children don't want this. I mean, I've seen so many of the videos and just I can't even get through it because it's just absolutely gut-wrenching. Absolutely gut-wrenching.
Yeah, even if they do want it, they're not old enough to really know what that actually means, right?
yeah.
And they've
So
been raised in it. Most of
right,
them have been raised in it, and so they're like, okay, well, this is just
this is normal.
what happens when you get to
Yeah.
puberty, you get married off to somebody, and like that's just how that goes. So like that doesn't make it okay at all, and they like their brains are not developed enough to know what's going on, and that's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah.
This,
So
this
go ahead, Richard.
this article did say that there was opposition from both indigenous and Islamic communities. It's not just the Islamic community,
Right.
but the excuses given by the Islamic representatives, because I tried to do a little bit of digging and I couldn't find much on the indigenous kind of viewpoint on this. So I was, I was left kind of just speaking on the Islamic point. But that's a good point that in Islam, these girls are often married to guys in the 30s, in the 40s, and in some cases they're only 8-9 years old. And this is one of the problems of religion, because it's the taking the example from Muhammad himself, which is he married Aisha when she was, I think she was
Purportedly 6, and then
6
consummated it.
and
6?
consummated it at
I was
9.
gonna say 8 or 9.
Yeah,
That
no,
was when the
they're married.
consummation would have.
Yeah, there is some argument about the exact age, but it's from the sources I've seen, it's probably that she were married at 6 and consummated at 9 years old, which is absolutely appalling. And
That makes me nauseous. I feel sick.
Yeah, this is why that these Islamic cultures, this is so prevalent, because it's following the example of Muhammad. And there are as we were talking about, progressive Muslims who kind of argue against this, but I don't think there's, without going into all the details of the surahs and the scholars and the background of that, there is a good argument that this is authentic teaching, that Muhammad did marry Aisha at that age.
And it was common in the Arab world at that time. So people see it as super controversial, and certainly today it is. Like, why would they have that in their religion, or why would they include those details? Why would they even have a hadith like that? It was super normal back then. It was super wrong back then too. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's not so unusual for them to have written about it, or for that to have been something that was included in the faith at that time, because it was so normal. So what gets me is the lack of there's no real critical thinking to the people who are like, well, it's a hadith and it says so I'm going to be allowed to do it, and so I'm going to do it. There's a huge disconnect with them with reality, where Like, whether or not it's authentic or not, whether or not they did something like that at the time or not, right here, right now, what is the right thing to do? And to continue to have that kind of like, to me, I see a lot of reason to believe that a lot of the hadiths, like authentic or not, I'm kind of a mythicist in terms of Muhammad and Jesus, where there's no really, really huge hardcore proof that Muhammad even existed, although there's more so than Jesus. But okay, he existed. Okay, he married this girl and he consummated it at 9. There needs to be some sort of uh mental connection that these people have, that what they're doing right here right now is horrible and wrong and harms people. And that's what really gets me, is that doesn't seem to be occurring. There's a lot of defense of the practice rather than a lot of reflecting on it. Um
And context needs, I think, to be given here for myself and Laura, like I said earlier,
Mhm.
both have insights into Islam from different
Yeah.
perspectives. I think the context here, because a lot of the people see the Quran and think, that's where all the Islamic rules come from. Most of Sharia law comes from the Hadith and the Sunnah, which are the words and the actions of Muhammad, because Muhammad was considered to be the best of men, and his actions and his words are what inform, even so more so than the Quran in some cases, what actually goes on in Islamic culture. And that's what a lot of these laws are based around. The fact that Muhammad did it is, you know, striking. For these cultures, it is something to be adhered to and looked up to, because he was considered the best of people.
Yeah. Well, and and I should clarify that as well. There's this overarching belief that whatever the morals are of whatever society at whatever time in history, if it was good for Muhammad to have done something, then it was good. Just period.
Yeah, definitely. But as we said earlier, this isn't just about young girls. Child marriage goes on around the world,
Mhm.
and and young boys are affected as well. So uh, we did have a look at an article talking about the young men as well, from UNICEF.
Mhm.
Um, it was an article from npr.org, and it
Yes.
stated that in its first ever in-depth analysis of child grooms published in 2019, UNICEF estimates 115 million boys and men around the world were married as children. So what are your kind of guys' views on male child marriage? Because it's something that as Laura said earlier, that's not touched upon very often.
I guess I'll jump in here. I think it is very, very common for boys, especially, to be excluded from conversations, not only of this, but of sexual abuse in general. When many girl survivors of sexual violence will come forward, I think a lot of us are coming to the point where we believe them, and we're moving towards a society who takes that kind of stuff seriously. But then we still have these boys and men coming forward who are then, well, you're a guy, so clearly your sexual desires say, the stereotypes of your sex and gender say that you should have liked it. We don't nearly talk about the mental health issue among men and boys, at the very least in the United States, but I guarantee it's not just here. And it's just getting so overlooked. Don't cry, be a man. And so, while we can be like, oh, these girls, oh my gosh, these little girls, it's like, okay, the little boys too.
Mhm.
They're just as vulnerable. They're just as, mentally stunted and not developed as not enough. They still don't know what's going on. And so I think that's definitely something that needs to be addressed more. We need to get it to the point where it's on equal ground. In all cases, but especially on this topic. And also, just kind of personally, I am in my early 20s, and I see, honestly, boys that are 18, 19 years old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's an infant. I want to pinch your cheeks. Like, you're so like little. Like, oh my gosh, you're a baby. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how can anyone in their 20s and older find a teenager or younger attractive? It just it blows my mind. I just genuinely do not fundamentally understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, Laura, what do you think?
I think you nailed it with the psychological impact. It's funny because we can easily acknowledge that rape or sexual assault or marriage has a negative psychological impact on women, and we can have a lot of empathy and compassion for them. But there's a lot of shame that goes into what a person experiences when they experience something like a sexual assault. And so, if you think that women feel ashamed with all the resources we're given and how much we're encouraged to talk about it and all the support that we get, just imagine how much harder it is for a boy or a male. And I think the article put it really well. So I'm going to read the article, a little quote right here. But they said, young men force themselves to be adults, but they don't have the psychological resources to cope with all the demands. There is more isolation, alienation, and a lot of physical pain within themselves. They're not skilled enough to provide the good, affectionate, emotional support and use a punitive parenting style. They don't want to face the difficult emotions of the child because they never got the opportunity to deal with their own emotional difficulties when they were quite young. You know, this is talking about the negative impact of marriage, right? And of just being forced to grow up too fast. And you add that definite added trauma when you start talking about sexual assault. That's even worse. And I would assume that in these cases of child marriage with the male grooms, it's likely a little bit of both. So Richard, what are your closing thoughts on this before we move on from this article?
I think regarding the Philippines article specifically,
Mhm.
the last word should go to Christine Rosary Uzon Chavez, who is a lawyer and executive director of the Philippine Commission on Women, who says the law finally recognizes child marriage as a crime across the Philippines. It addresses legal gaps that allow the practice that threatens the health, well-being, and development of children. With this enactment, we can protect girls from being trapped in an unwanted marriage, early pregnancy, violence, and other violations to their human rights and destiny. And as our good friend Cynthia MacDonald would say, a step in the right direction.
I love it. That's a really good way to wrap it. So we still have a long way to go and it's still happening, but at least if we can learn anything from this article, it's that we're continuing to move at least in the right direction. So yeah, before we move on to segment 3, I just wanted to take a little moment to talk to the audience and to thank you guys all, especially the veteran subscribers for your subscribership and the new subscribers for hitting that subscribe button. Because of all your guys' dedicated viewership, we are now over 10,000 subscribers. And that's a really, really big milestone. That means that we're able to do fundraisers. And the more that we get those subscribers going, the more and more we can do as a show and as an organization. So thank you guys for your subscribership. If you haven't subscribed, please take a really quick moment to do so. It's just a matter of a click of a button, but it helps us out tremendously. If you have already subscribed, you can still help us out by sharing this YouTube channel with your friends, family, neighbors, dog, anybody that can hit that subscribe button. Give it a share, and let's start getting the viewership up even a little bit more. Um, Once you've done that, you can also help us out by hitting the like button, and you can help yourself out by hitting the reminder button. So if you turn notifications on, it will remind you every time we have a new show. And as another reminder, our shows are always every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time. So hit that reminder button, the like and subscribe button, and let's keep this channel growing. Um, and I'm sure you're aware, the Atheist Community of Austin has another YouTube channel. We've been talking a lot about it on all of our shows, but if you haven't checked it out yet, I really suggest you do so. And that's the Atheist Experience Network. So this is a place where we take all of the shows that the ACA does, and we put them in one really sweet, convenient, nice little package. So you can go hit up any of the shows, check out old content, binge to your heart's desire, and you will never miss another episode. All right. we are moving on to segment 3, and we have a looking back.
Looking back.
I love that music. This is about Piltdown Man.
Oh, Lord.
Is Piltdown Man even a thing anymore? I don't know. This is a feature written on the Freethought Almanac WordPress page from the 20th of January 2011 by Ronald Bruce Mayer. And I'm not going to go where people may think I'm going to go with this one, with the religious fundamentalism. I'm going to leave that to Laura because I'm sure she will go there.
You never
Okay,
know.
What I'm going to do as a skeptic educator is say that this is a perfect example of the fact that science sometimes gets it wrong. And it's a point that needs stressing, especially to our religious friends who like to jump on science, getting it wrong as a kind of gotcha. Science sometimes does get it wrong, but on every single occasion that it does, and we realize it, it is science that makes the correction. And that's so important. So why, in this case, did science get it wrong? Well, it was a hoax. The Piltdown Man fossil was essentially a hoax. We don't know who did it, because two of the people who were still alive, who were possibly involved, won't say anything. The third person's unfortunately passed away before he had a chance to come clean, if it was him. But essentially, they were bones that were not of an old intermediary species, and they were claimed that they were. And for some reason, due to various techniques that weren't available at the time to do the proper testing, just taking people at the word on certain things. It was just accepted that this fossil was as old as it was mentioned to be. And it was something like 42 years, I think, between the hoax being kind of perpetrated and brought to, like, the fossils being brought forward and it actually coming to light as techniques for testing and things got further on. So, what are your thoughts on it, on the whole thing, whether it's the religious aspect of the fundamentalists going against it or the scientific aspect? I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have got to say.
All right, I guess I'm up next. So one thing I definitely want to reiterate that Richard said was that what corrects science is better science, not, well, this is what we were saying because we have this book that told us blah, blah, blah. It's always, okay, we were wrong about something. Well, what disproved what we originally thought? Better science, more research, peer review. That's the kind of stuff that will actually give credibility to, disproving any kind of things. I definitely think it's funny that the creationists are latching onto this and, like Richard say, like, using it as like a gotcha or like a aha, see, look, evolution isn't real. And it's so funny because sure, like maybe this doesn't add to evolutionary theory, but it certainly doesn't take away from it. And it doesn't say that evolutionary theory is wrong. I can't stand evolution is just a theory. I have taken, am currently taking, and will take more evolution classes at the university level. And this is something they drill into our heads is don't let people say that because it's so false. And the mountain of evidence that we have towards evolutionary theory, it speaks for itself. A handful of fossils that we, found out to be a hoax or whatever. Okay, we still have divergent evolution, we have convergent evolution, we have molecular biology, we have other fossil records, we have all this other kind of evidence that this is like, oh, okay, so this doesn't add to it, but it definitely does not take away from evolutionary theory. So I just thought that was really funny. And, I think the best part about this is like, okay, so you're saying that for 40 years or whatever, science had it wrong. Well, where was God or your deity telling us that that was wrong? They didn't say it either. So really, science has a leg up right now because I still have not heard any deity say that the Piltdown man is a hoax. So still waiting on that. But anyway, Laura, what do you think?
I love it. I actually really, really appreciate that this is the direction that Richard took it right off the bat, because this is actually what I'm more passionate about. Because like naysayers are naysayers, and people are going to latch on to whatever they want to in order to try and get a leg up. Um, but if you really look at good argumentation, there really isn't much to be had here. So, in terms of the creationist argument, like, yeah, I think we should definitely touch on that and talk about it a little bit. Um, but I really like talking about the science part. Science is not a person or an entity or a thing. It is a process. And we can apply the scientific process in as many different ways across as many different spectrums as possible. But one of the things that's so great about it is that it is self-correcting. So, when you have something that somebody proves is true, or they have a claim that they've tested and they now have facts to back up that claim, that does not stop somebody else from going in and testing that exact same claim and seeing what kind of results they get. In fact, really good scientists should be encouraging it, right? You don't want to have the claim that 20 years down the line somebody else says, well, they got it wrong, right? You want to know right off the bat so that you can fix it and go on from there. In this case, what you have is a really, really good dose of fraud and bad science. And what I thought was interesting is you do have some good scientists that are kind of wrapped up into this conspiracy, if that's what you want to call it, right? That verified the bones. And so this doesn't just demonstrate that sometimes science gets it wrong, it demonstrates that individuals can be biased. And so at the time, there was really this push to find the missing link. And I got to get my air quotes a little closer, missing link. And there really was a push to prove evolution in general. And so a lot of these scientists were hopeful when Piltdown Man came to fruition. And so some really bad science was done. And you didn't have people going in and re-verifying it or trying to falsify it. And I think that in general in today's world, I would hope, and I really do see it a lot more often, that you have people that want their work falsified, and you have people that want to go in and look at other people's work and see if it's good or bad, or hey, if this is earth-shattering news, let's make sure it's legit. And so I do think that this is a really good example, um, that the scientific community should, and I think did, latch onto in terms of, oh shit, we have got to make sure that we are on top of our stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And the fact that it does appear to be a hoax, even though no one ever admitted it, there's pretty strong evidence against it. The actual thing that were found were a human skull, or that were presented as being found, was a human skull, which was of 620 years old, with a 500-year-old orangutan jaw, a second skull fragment from medieval times, a 500-year-old jawbone, which was probably from Malaysia, 3 teeth, one of which was an elephant molar from Tunisia,
That was fun,
a hippopotamus tooth from Malta or Sicily, and a canine tooth from a Pleistocene era chimpanzee. And this is the kind of, at the time, this was all presented as evidence, and it just wasn't checked thoroughly enough. And I think one of the most interesting things about this article for me is that, we said that science corrected itself, but it wasn't just a case of all of a sudden, one day somebody discovered this was a hoax. It was, I did a bit of digging of the time frame of how this actually came about, and try and just remember, the more hominids were discovered, which kind of filled in the missing link aspect of it. And this discovery didn't fit into the wider picture that was being framed. So kind of question marks were being raised amongst that. In 1925, which was 13 years after the discovery, the dating of the gravel was found to be wrong. It was more recent than Dawson, who was one of the scientists, claimed. And in 1947, which was 35 years after discovery, a new test for fluorine content was discovered, which has established a recent origin of the fossils. So this was really a gradual process of looking at lots of different aspects of a wider picture, which brought this to light. And I think that's what's so good about it, because it wasn't a case of somebody just discovered it and shouted hoax. It was the scientific process which corrected the
Doing
mistake.
what it was, meant to do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, as a, prospective scientist, biologist, I actually find this really exciting because, as they say, the more mistakes you make, the more you learn from it. And so I think that this is a big, huge thing that we know not to do again. And, I like how someone pointed out that, a lot of the good scientists, they want their stuff falsified. They want to be, quote, proven wrong, because then that means that there's more to discover. I find this very exciting. It means, okay, what else is out there? What else can we go discover? What can we find? What mistakes did we make and how can we learn from it? This is definitely something that should not be latched onto as a bad thing. I mean, of course, we should be more careful in the future and make sure we're putting out the most accurate information we can. But at the same time, I mean, what does this mean for all the other stuff we could discover? I actually find it very encouraging and very I'm excited about it. It just means we have a lot more to do, and we have better techniques now that we didn't have before, and people checking each other. And I don't really see anything negative from this, other than, of course, a few bad methods and stuff. But I think we can choose to look at it as a a misstep of the scientific community, but I think we should focus more on how it can improve our techniques and our methods in the future. So yeah, I really don't see anything negative about this.
Yeah, I don't even know if I see it necessarily as a misstep of the scientific community, because the people that you're going to have dishonest people no matter where you go, right? Like, you are going to have rapists and pedophiles in the police department and the fire department and the military, right? Like, places where we hold people up as heroes. You're going to have dishonest people in academia, and you're going to have dishonest scientists. And so you certainly had like hoaxsters. You had people who deliberately went out and lied about their findings. And then the scientists that really made the mistakes were the ones that verified the finds, right? Like,
Right,
they
that was
trusted
more
the
what I
people.
was trying to get at. Sorry, I didn't word
Yeah,
it
yeah. No,
perfectly.
and I do appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I do agree with you that this is a good example of science doing what it's meant to do, which is you have something you think you found, you have an explanation for it, and that explanation may stick for a little while, and then it eventually doesn't. What I think was the most profound about this is the fact that we're still talking about it, and anything other than a scientific discussion of what not to do, right? The fact that it's still newsworthy. And what I was kind of thinking is, corrections, they travel like wildfire in the scientific and academic community, right? And then they travel like snail snot through the general population. Like, sometimes those corrections
Absolutely.
don't even frickin' occur. Yeah. So this is to me, a really good example of our sort of lack of scientific literacy in the general population. The fact that we even need to still
Absolutely.
talk about this.
The fact that some people are even saying evolution is just a theory, even that just shows, not in a derogatory sense, but just, ignorance and of science. But I feel like with the internet at your fingertips and so many people talking against it, it's like, okay, well, at what point does it become willful? That's still something I'm kind of wrestling with, but yeah, I definitely agree. The scientific literacy is not where it should be.
Yeah. And it's not all, it's going to remain low in areas where people want it to remain low, where you get picked in. I don't want to bring the Texas school board into it again, but I'm going to.
Do it.
When you've got,
Go
because I
for it.
mention it pretty much every episode.
Just a joke.
When you've got people like that who deliberately want to twist things, and yeah, you've got people working for certain creationist organizations who are fully qualified biologists who went to school, who were funded to go to school to learn the actual science so that they could twist it and try and debunk it. This is a thing that happens in our world, in America.
Yeah.
You know, this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening at all anywhere.
No, I just want to put that in perspective really quick, though, because a lot of people do say that. They're like, well, there's scientists that believe in this and scientists that believe in that. Like, I can go to a Bible college and I can get a degree in any Bible topic I want. And I can go to an Islamic school and get a degree in whatever Islamic topic I want. Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe everything that's being taught. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have good or bad critical thinking skills because I got through whatever the topic was. Right. And just because you're able to be skeptical in one department doesn't necessarily mean that you're skeptical across the board. And I think that you bring up a really good point, that it's really, really important to remember that just because a person has a PhD doesn't mean they don't also have cognitive biases. But what are your guys'
Yeah.
closing thoughts on this before we move on to our last segment?
Well, I guess I'll go since Richard brought us in here. Yeah, I'm very excited about this. The only thing that beats bad science, quote unquote bad science, is better science, good science. People peer reviewing and checking up on each other. And, I don't see anything super negative about this other than we learn from our mistakes and we keep chugging forward and keep moving on. And I'm just excited for what kind of lessons we've learned from this and how that's going to impact our scientific discoveries in the future.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
that is really good.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's a fantastic illustration, as I said at the start, of how science corrects itself, and that sometimes science does get it wrong, but it's always science that does the correcting. I have yet to know of a single case of science getting it wrong. And again, this is something August touched on earlier, and somebody coming up with a passage from the Bible or the Quran and saying, well, actually, I'd like to correct you there, and confirming it, and science saying, oh yeah, they're right, actually. We balls that
As
up.
a matter of
soz."
fact.
Right.
The Quran was right all along. It's just not, it's never happened. It's very unlikely to ever happen. Regarding the Piltdown man, this is looking back, and let's look back and leave Piltdown man where it belongs, in the fucking past, because we don't need it anymore. Let's
Amen,
move
brother.
on. And
Right.
You know what?
Absolutely.
And on that note, let's actually move on. Let's take a quick step in the right direction. I'm going to have August tell us about our very last segment, and you can bring us to the end of the show.
All right, perfect. So our last segment is titled Gen Zs Aren't Committed to Being Committed. And I wanted to touch on this because I myself am in Generation Z. And so I thought maybe there is a unique perspective to be had there. But basically what it's saying is that we Gen Zers have a very different kind of perspective on love and sex and dating, as far as, marriage and kind of what we're looking for in a partner and when we're ready to, quote, settle down. And so it just kind of goes over a lot of different comparisons between Generation Z and the other generations, such as millennials or Gen Xers. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. So what do you all think before I give my 2 cents?
I'm generation old, so it's not a surprise to me really that different cultures and different generations have different attitudes towards sex. I've got different attitude than my parents had. They've got different attitudes that their parents had. And my children will grow up with different attitudes than I have. I think it's going in the right direction. It's moving to a more healthy way. One thing that did strike me about this was that it seemed to be largely a personal opinion rather than research so much. So although I did agree with a lot of what the article said, the thing for me is I'd really like to see research which would add to what was said in the article. It would
Absolutely.
get some peer-reviewed research behind it, get that stuff out there, and let's have an academic conversation about it.
I feel like you read my notes because I put in there one important thing to note is that much of the article is anecdotal and opinion. So I think it's kind of funny that you touched on that. And that's not to say that it's not true or that there aren't trends, but I agree a lot with what August had to say and what Richard had to say, but I didn't really agree too much with the article itself in terms of this being just a Gen Z trend. And I'll explain more what I mean about that, but, um, what I'm seeing is general trends in multiple generations moving away from traditional relationship models and really challenging them and thinking about them. So I see not just in terms of marriage being challenged, with, "Hey, marriage is a institution that's not really working very well, so, me and my long-term partner, we're not gonna do that." But I also see a change away from just monogamous relationships to it being more open to talking about different relationship models in general, whether it's serial monogamy or polyamory, or just opening up a monogamous relationship to be an open marriage. There's a lot of different relationship models now that are being more openly discussed without like so many taboo labels being attached to them. So I really do see this as more of a cultural trend. But August brought up a good point earlier that I think could explain the Gen Z thing. And it was back during the talk about the Catholic Church and how when you're raised in something that's normal, it just becomes normal. So those young people who are raised with like, oh, gay marriage is okay, they adopt it because it's normal for them. It's what they're used to. It's what they grew up with. And I think a lot of Gen Zers were seeing this sort of transition and these struggles that our generations were sort of wrestling with. And they're embracing like the hey, you know what? That is a problem and I'm gonna think about it. Which I think is a good thing. So while I don't necessarily think the article is wrong, I just think they sort of miss a broader cultural perspective that could be sort of that this conversation needs to be enveloped in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So one thing I think Laura kind of touched on that I wanted to kind of extrapolate on was the fact that, they're I think the article puts a lot of emphasis on the word marriage and kind of what that means. And I think some people look at like, oh, well, Gen Z doesn't want to get married, or at the very least, they're waiting to get married, as like, we don't want to have just one long-term partner. But very anecdotal, but I am an old Gen Zer, and me and a lot of people I know, and just the people in their 20s and maybe late teens, we are still in long-term committed relationships that are very stereotypical, socially acceptable kind of monogamy. So just because we aren't making it a, government thing, does not mean we don't commit to people, and it doesn't mean that we don't want long-term companionship. So I wanted to make it clear that, like, even though we are maybe waiting to get married or choosing not to get married, that does not mean we don't want monogamy. And so I want people to get that misconception out of their head. I know I personally am very wishy-washy on it, and I'm in my early 20s, and I just can't even imagine, even though I myself am in a long-term committed monogamous relationship, I cannot imagine, doing that kind of thing right now. And not only marriage, but there's so much about, in the headlines, I think, about, the birth rate is dropping, and not just with Gen Z, but also with, millennials. And it's like, okay, but why is that like a super bad thing? I really am not finding a very compelling reason for why that would be negative, especially with all of these circumstantial stuff that is happening in our world right now, climate change and, unrest and, war and all these kind of things. I mean, I feel like it makes sense to at least wait. And I think it mentioned financials in there as well. And so there's just so many points to touch on. And again, it's very anecdotal. But I think, I don't think it should be viewed as a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the. I agree with both of you, and I think that's one of the things that, like I said, that I found with the article and that Laura apparently did as well, was that it was from a very kind of anecdotal perspective. I'm married to one person in a monogamous relationship. I've no intention of doing anything outside of that. I'm very happy with the way I've been married a very long time. By the same token, I do see a lot. I don't know what it's like in the States or in other countries, but in Britain, I see a lot of people who are older than me, 15, 20, 25 years older than me, who are married, who are opening that up to allow other partners in, various different I'm going to say combos, and that sounded a little bit more crude than I intended it. To different ways of thinking about marriage and not having it as a monogamous thing. And that's, I think people are touching on what Laura said. It's not just one generation that's doing it. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at things in a more it's more of a cultural thing. Now it's becoming part of the culture for all people. And that's the joy of it. That's what I found really good about the article, is that people can do things. We're in a stage now, we're moving forward. And if you want to be in a monogamous relationship, you can be. If you want to be in an open relationship, you can be. If you don't want to have a relationship and you just want as many sexual partners as you want, you can. And without like stigma being attached to it so much. And that's something that we never had in the past. We just didn't. You got married, and if you were lucky, you were happy, and if you weren't, you got divorced or you lived in an unhappy marriage, and with one partner, and that was the case for a long time. We are moving in the right direction. Laura's muted.
Sorry about that. I have a cat in the room and I wanted to avoid the meowing. But one thing I wanted to point out was that the term, or the use of the term, pragmatic, right? And that's something I'm actually kind of curious about. I don't have necessarily an opinion on it, but it caught my attention. So are the Gen Zers all necessarily pragmatic in the sense that they are very, very thoughtful and they're thinking about it and they're weighing their options? Or is it in some cases that, there's sort of that rebellion against what they see as a broken system, or that they're seeing things fail so much for other people? Like, so to me, what does it mean when the author says pragmatic? Has she done the research to determine that these people are making informed decisions, or are people making emotional decisions, or is it kind of a mix of both? Like, certainly when I listen to August talk, I would say that's a very informed decision, right? I would say she's thought about it and she's making like good, healthy judgments in terms of partnership. But it's kind of a broad spectrum to say that all Gen Zers are this or all Gen Zers are that. So I was just very curious and was wondering what your guys' thoughts were when you hear terms like that. Like, is there a lot of thoughtfulness going into this, or is it just a cultural trend? Or what are your guys' thoughts on the whys and the hows?
So this is kind of tricky because it's so I think it's on like a very case by case basis. I think
Mhm.
at least again very anecdotal, but the people I've spoken to and myself, and even the article goes into it, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we are reaching financial stability and emotional stability honestly kind of later, because of the unique struggles of our generation, I think, and every generation has unique struggles, but I think specifically ours are putting I don't know, more perspective into long-term kind of things and not just, well, when you get in your 20s, you find someone and you settle down and you get married and you have kids and there's all this stigma, 30-year-olds getting pregnant, which is totally fine. And then people are like, why did you wait so long? Like, it's just so I think part of my generation is thinking like, well, I'm not financially stable. I can barely afford an apartment, let alone a house. And how am I going to raise kids if I can't even support myself? And, the people I speak to are all broke college kids, including myself. And, we're, just trying to survive. And how can we think about all of this, honestly, extra stuff about marriage and buying a house and having children when we can't even, stand to live in our current, so I think some people are saying, hey, I don't want to bring a child into this. And especially I'm not ready to. And also seeing, like they mentioned, the kind of failures of the other generations and kind of how having children and getting married has impacted them. And then I just think some people are kind of just, live for the moment. It's whatever, we'll just go with the flow, whatever happens, happens. And so they'll just kind of bounce around, which nothing wrong with that. It's just, so I really can't say yes, people are being thoughtful or no, people aren't being thoughtful. I think it's just such a combination of everything. I would like to think that majority of them are at least putting some kind of intelligent, taking the time to think about it. It's definitely stuff that's not it's something that needs to be thought through before carried out. But Richard, what did you think?
I think that this article to me, it mentions Gen Z, but what demographic of Gen Z? Because that covers, lots of, people in poverty will probably have different ideas to people who are from privileged backgrounds. It's. I think there needs to be more research done on it. I think
Mhm.
we really need to have a look at those. There's so much that comes into this. What are the ratio of, for example, teen pregnancies that are going off, and from what parts of the community they happening or most prevalent in? All this extra research needs to be done to form a bigger picture, I think, and
Agreed.
that was my major difficulty with this article. It just seemed to be kind of a blog post from a single person who was representing the whole of the generation with her own with ideas, and that was a big thing for me. I agreed with a lot of the stuff that was in it and a lot of the stuff August touched on, about people being thoughtful and putting things back and waiting longer. I do see that as well in younger people, like I'm 90. But by the same token, it has to be said that more research needs to be done to get a fuller picture. I think if investment is done, we get the research behind that, we get our heads in, we can have a really good conversation about Gen Z. But without that bigger picture, without those different analytics being done, then I think we are left with, this is my opinion, and this is my opinion, and this is my opinion, which is all very well and good, but it's not particularly informative.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that that's gonna be the note that we leave this on. Although I think there's a lot of good to be gleaned from this in terms of like, how cultures change and evolve over time. But I agree with you, and I think that that's a really good place to end it. Because we are coming up on the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen. So I just want to take a few minutes really quickly here to talk about our fan groups and different media outlets and ways that people can stay connected. Um, just a way of staying connected with each other and a way of staying connected with the show. So you can find most of the nonprofits hosts hanging out on the atheist community of Discord by going to tiny.cc/acd Discord. And that's a place where we just all get into chat and have really casual conversation. You can also find us on Facebook at tiny.cc/FBNP to get connected there. And if you would like to support the show, there's a couple different ways you can do so, actually. You can become a Patreon at tiny.cc/PatreonNP. Or if you already find yourself shopping at Amazon, you can go to Amazon Smile and support the ACA by shopping at smile.amazon.com and then selecting the Atheist Community of Austin as the beneficiary. Um, be sure to check that link or use that link to help out the ACA. It really does go a long way towards helping us. Additionally, we value your guys' feedback. So if you're in live chat, thank you very, very much. But if you want to reach out to us in other ways, um, especially if you don't like making comments in the live chat, which I know some people, it's a thing. Go ahead and email us instead at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. Thank you guys all for joining us, and hosts, thank you for co-hosting with me. It was a blast. And we'll see you guys all next time.
Watch the Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.